What's your biggest shock family discovery? Story 1. This one happened to my wife, not me. She lost her birth certificate and called another US state to request a replacement. The woman on the phone said, "No problem. Just confirm your parents' names from the certificate I'm holding." My wife gave her mother's name. Correct. She gave her father's name. Wrong. It turned out her mother had divorced her biological father, kidnapped my wife as a child, and fled halfway across the country, completely cutting off her paternal family. The man my wife believed was her father. Her entire life was not her biological dad. Her mother had altered the birth certificate. She has since met her real father's family and now has a relationship with them. Story 2. When I was 26, I discovered I had an older brother who had been put up for adoption. My mom had him as a teenager in the 1970s and chose a closed adoption. He went to an unknown family, and only my mother, her sister, and my dad, whom she married later, ever knew. I found out accidentally while browsing Ancestry.com looking for my grandfather's Korean War records. The site flagged a potential sibling connection and listed my mother, who has a very uncommon name, as a possible biological parent. I called her immediately. She confirmed everything. We've met several times since. It's strange but kind of amazing seeing how similar we are. Story 3. Thanks to genetic genealogy sites, we recently learned my grandfather had 2 secret children that nobody knew about. He was a traveling salesman in the 1940s. At his biological father's funeral, someone casually told my mom it was a shame her sister couldn't attend. My mom was confused. She didn't have any sisters that she knew of. She grew up only with maternal half-brothers and hadn't even known her biological father until her mid-20s. She filed the comment away and moved on. She had 3 kids to raise and no information to follow up on. Years later, she got a half-sister match on 23andMe. She sent a message. It was never answered. She's respected that silence. To this day, we know nothing about the woman except that she exists. Our maternal family history is full of stories like this. Story 4. I found out I have a half-brother. He's a year older than my oldest brother, was adopted. His biological mother was engaged to my father but broke it off because she didn't believe in divorce and couldn't see herself married to him for life. She gave the baby up for adoption. When he later went looking for his birth family, my mom gave him all the information she had. She said my father had told her the whole story early in their relationship. Story 5. In my 20s, my great-grandmother lived with me for a few years after I bought my first house. One morning, while leaving for work, my aunt pulled into the driveway. I stopped to say hello and she casually told me, "Uncle Jimmy died." I laughed and asked, "Who the hell is Uncle Jimmy?" Turns out he was my great-grandmother's youngest son, who had been incarcerated since I was too young to remember him. Most of us great-grandkids never knew he existed. He died in prison in 2005 after being locked up since 1985. Story 6. My family's big secret was that my uncle kidnapped my cousin as a baby. After divorcing my cousin's mother shortly after birth, my uncle took the baby across the border, where my grandmother was waiting with a plane. They flew to Mexico, and my grandmother raised my cousin in the mountains of Durango for a year while hiding out. Eventually, they returned to her hometown, where she raised him as her own son. This was the early 1970s. No cell phones, no Amber Alerts. The reason my uncle went to such extremes was that the child's mother had taken him to the US, where her new partner introduced her to drugs. My dad traveled across the border frequently for work and was constantly stopped and questioned about my uncle. He genuinely didn't know where he was and didn't care. Despite their bad relationship, my dad helped raise my cousin and paid for his education. Story 7. I recently learned my aunt and uncle are 10 years apart in age. My aunt was in her early 30s working at a local night spot while finishing community college when she met my uncle, who was in his early 20s and broke. She thought he was gorgeous, like a young John Travolta, and wanted to travel but had no one to go with. So she offered to pay his way if he'd travel with her. They went everywhere: Japan, Iceland, Australia, nothing official for years. Then one day, 4 years later, They got married on a cruise in the Netherlands. No invites, no planning. 2 years later, they had kids and settled down in the mountains. I spent my whole life thinking they were the same age. Turns out, my aunt was the original sugar mama. Story 8. Growing up, I was incredibly close with my cousin. She had medical conditions that caused bruising, so I often helped care for her. When I was about 10, I learned she was actually my sister. Child Protective Services had taken her from my parents, believing her medical condition was abuse. My aunt adopted her. My parents fought it in court until they were bankrupt and even ended up in the news, and on one of those trashy talk shows in the 80s. Despite everything, we stayed close. Finding out was just surreal. Story 9. When I was 12, I found paperwork hidden in the basement showing that both my older sister and I had different fathers than the man raising us. When I finally confronted my very conservative mother, she told me my sister was from a brief fling when she was 18, and I was from a previous marriage to a man who died in Vietnam. I also learned I had 3 half-siblings from my biological father. Suddenly, a lot of things made sense, especially why my younger brothers were treated so much better, and my parents wondered why I went off the rails as a teenager. Story 10. My favorite uncle married my dad's sister. They were classic dink wasps. Wine with dinner every night, golf on weekends, collared shirts always. He was jovial, gentle, and solidly upper middle class. I had known him my entire life. In my late 20s, at a family dinner, he casually mentioned he had a silver star. I said, "I didn't even know you were in the military." Turns out he was Air Force Special Ops during Vietnam and earned it in Cambodia while assisting a CIA unit that got trapped. "We weren't at war with Cambodia," he said. "No," he replied, "we weren't. Rest in peace, Uncle Jimmy, a man with a terrible chip shot and the ability to end someone with a pencil. If you've got more, send them. It'll keep matching tone, length, and weight exactly like this." Story 11. When my grandma was in the hospital on her deathbed, they came in and took out a bridge from her upper teeth. No one in the family knew it existed. For 60 years she had had this bridge and no one knew about it. She had met my grandfather when she was 19 and had my dad a year later. My grandfather was a biker and all this was going down in the 50s. She told us that she had attended a party with him at his clubhouse and they got super drunk. Apparently she got up on a table and started talking crap to him. He did not like that the rest of the bikers started making fun of him over it. He walked over and punched her square in the mouth, knocking out all of her teeth. They broke up after this and my dad was raised by someone else. She never told him or anyone this ever happened. We only found out because of a morphine confessional. Story 12. My grandmother's family was heavily involved with the Irish mob in Boston. Her father and uncles were all low-level enforcer types. I found this out after she passed. We were laughing about how she always insisted on sitting facing the door at any restaurant at which we were dining. And my grandfather said she learned that from her dad, so you can see somebody coming in if they're trying to end you. He told us a bunch more stories after that, including about how his father-in-law's superiors were heavily involved in garbage collection related extortion. Story 13. My grandfather rode motorcycles. I never knew this growing up. He never talked about it, and I'd never seen one at his place. 2 years ago, we went to visit him for Christmas. He took me and my husband out to the car barn. I knew he'd restored 57 Chevys, so I figured he wanted to show off his current project. He took us to a side room and pulled a sheet of an intact 59 Cushman Eagle. It was rusty, sure, but all the parts were there. Then he pointed to another sheet and we pulled it off. There was a Franken bike with a lawnmower engine, and then he pulled out a picture of him riding it. Turns out he'd been pretty wild in his youth and my grandma never let him ride again, but he kept a few projects in the barn so that one day he could. He passed away on Christmas Eve last year. That Cushman Eagle is now sitting in my garage so I can get it running again. Story 14. My mail was showing us a group photo of her family from when she was a child. She was like, "That's me with my mom and dad. Here's Uncle Bill. There's my cousin Rose. That's Kara," pointing at a teenager. I stopped her. "Kara, your stepmother?" Yep, that's her. And here's my grandmama and papa. But wait, why is your stepmother in this picture with you and your parents? Weren't they still married at this point? And she looks so young. Oh, well, she was Uncle Bill and Aunt Marcia Sward at that point. After her own parents died, they took her in. Anyway, I had to stop her repeatedly to clarify, as she just kept trying to bulldoze right past the fact that her stepmother had basically been her father's adoptive niece and he had watched her grow up from the age of 7. The piping hot tea was that her mother hated Kara, because apparently teenage Kara had a crush on her father and would come over to the house to do his laundry. No one else's, just his, and her mother blamed Kara for their eventual divorce, after which her father married Kara when he was 48 and she was 21. My husband was shocked to learn all of this. Story 1523 in me. I had taken it and nothing weird came back at first. Then about a year later, I got a message from a girl around my age wondering how we're related. I am shocked. It says she's my first cousin. My dad was an only child and my mom has one brother. So of course it's Uncle Randy. She looks exactly like him, like there's no denying that's his daughter. I traced the timing back and he was engaged to my aunt when she was conceived. Him and my aunt have been married for 30 plus years at this point, with 2 other adult children. I send her some pics and give her his contact information, but she doesn't want to reach out. So now I am friends with her on social media. Never met in person, just peering in on each other's lives. She seems really cool and I'd love to meet her in real life, but it just seems awkward. To my knowledge, she's never reached out. I see my uncle like once a year, and it's so weird to know this and not say anything. But I also feel it's none of my business. If she wants to reach out to him, then she can. Story 16. In 2018, through Ancestry DNA, we found out that my great-grandfather's brother had a daughter no one else knew about. The daughter was now in her 90s. We were able to meet her and had a mini reunion for her to meet the 4 living half-siblings she had. Apparently, my great-grandfather's brother, who was like 19 at the time, got 2 teen girls pregnant. One did not want to marry him because he was a drunk, gambler, etc., so he married the other girl, and they went on to have 8 kids. They never had anything to do with the daughter, except he did stop by once when she was like 6 years old. No one in the family knew. All of that generation were dead, but my mom knows that her grandfather would not be okay with his brother discarding a child like that. My great-grandfather also had a sister. This woman, the secret daughter, looked a lot like her. Story 17. As an adult, I found out my aunt and uncle are uncle and niece. As in, my aunt is the oldest child of my grandma. My uncle, my grandma's youngest sibling. I am Chinese. There is a specific title for each relative, but that uncle we literally say uncle in English. They never had kids and always treated my sister and I very well. I didn't see him much as a teen and adult. I am not particularly close to any of my family. No hate. Just keep them at arm's length for various reasons. He recently passed from Parkinson's and dementia. He was in his 70s. My parents and aunt didn't want me to see him sick. I guess they wanted to shield me and keep his privacy or dignity. We randomly went to my aunt and uncle's house to drop off eggs during the whole Costco ran out of eggs crisis. I guess everyone was in a good mood because I was able to say hi to my uncle. He remembered me and was super happy. He passed away a week later. My aunt said she was very surprised he remembered me and that seeing me was the most lucid he was in a while. I think it gave him peace to let go. Story 18. My grandparents on my mom's side had 8 children. Growing up, my mom kept us under the impression that my grandpa was a great man. When I was in high school, he passed away from cancer. It was really tough on the whole family, but my grandmother started seeing a rich guy 30 years her junior while my grandpa was dying of cancer. She also had a bunch of plastic surgery and was very separated from the whole family emotionally. Almost 15 years later, my mom and aunts got a letter from her. She laid out the truth about their relationship. He impregnated her while she was underage, 16 I think, and in her words, kept her pregnant for 8 years after that. He basically assaulted her for years and abused her, and no one knew. When he got sick, she finally felt brave enough to leave. Story 19. My sister-in-law found out her dad wasn't really her dad through a 23andMe DNA test at 31 years old. She did 23andMe, and so did her biological father, and the results connected them as a father or daughter. Relationship. The dad that raised her is Native American, and her two brothers have her dad's characteristics, and she looks very white. They thought she just resembled her mom more than her brothers did, and she also thought she was part Native her whole life. She's involved with the culture and produces a lot of Native crafts. This discovery was really upsetting for her, but she met her real dad, and he's a white guy who is a very kind and well-adjusted person that lives in the same city as them. She's enjoying having new half-siblings and nieces and nephews now that she's gotten used to the idea. Story 20. I knew my dad had a weird childhood. He was the second in a set of Irish twins to a teen mom with a teen mom in the 60s. Definitely not good, but it never occurred to me how odd it was that his older brother stayed with his mom and he went with his dad, who was not interested in being a father. Turns out, my dad was a chronic bedwetter, so his mom just dumped him at his dad's house. It was especially hard to hear because my brother was a chronic bedwetter, and instead of getting him help, they just made him use diapers until middle school. Story 21. When I realized that my boomer, angry, abusive Catholic mom was angry at the three of us kids our whole childhood because she was a closeted lesbian, she was not able to be herself until my dad died from lung cancer in his 70s. When he passed away and she got a girlfriend, I tried my best to show her how much I supported her without forcing her to come out to me. She died at the age of 80 from Parkinson's without ever admitting it to anyone in the family. I silently forgave her for a lot of my childhood trauma, being absent emotionally and not nurturing at all. It makes me sad that she had to live her whole life that way. Story 22. Throwaway. Just to respond to this and ensure my family doesn't see it. I am 50 and my mom, still alive, is 80. I submitted my DNA to Ancestry DNA like 15 years ago, just because I thought it would be interesting, and we have no privacy these days anyway, so I wasn't worried about my DNA being out there. Fast forward to this year, and long story short, I found out that the person I called Dad is not actually my biological father. I confronted my mom, and when she heard the name of my DNA match, she confirmed it was true. An affair from 50 years ago. My dad is still alive and doesn't know. My biological father is dead. She clearly hoped to take this to her grave. As of right now, my mom thinks that only she and I know. My son and his wife also know. I haven't been able to go to a family gathering since I found out because I am just still processing it all. Story 23. My biological grandmother died many years before I was born. My father was 17 at the time of her death. He went to the USAF after the incident and married my mother in 59. What happened to my grandmother was never a conversation. I grew up never asking. Grandpa married twice after. His third wife acted like my grandmother. He was a widower twice. The secret was that my biological grandmother was a victim of a murder-suicide. Not Grandpa, hell no. He had to relocate to a different location to get a job when it happened. Grandma worked at a store and the guy next door was infatuated with her. When she rejected him, he went crazy. I was in my late 30s when I found out. Small town, all my uncles and most everyone knew. Some of my cousins are still not aware. I like to think she rejected his advances. Those were different times in the 1950s. Story 24. My grandmother was actually my great aunt, and of course, one of my great aunts was actually my grandmother. My non-biological grandmother was married, but they were unable to have children. So in World War II, when my grandfather was overseas, she adopted her born out of wedlock sister's child, with special permission from the army. My dad found out in his early 20s there was a family fallout, etc. What we found out recently when I did DNA in a final effort to find out who my dad's father is, not knowing, caused him huge distress throughout his life. Because his birth mother would never tell, I discovered we are related to my grandma's husband that adopted Dad. So the two options are my grandma's husband, 31, slept with her 18-year-old sister, or her 18-year-old sister slept with her husband's little brother, who would have been maybe 13 years old. We still can't work out, which is worse. Story 25. My great-great-grandmother was severely abused by my great-great-grandfather. One day, she overheard him making plans to traffic their 2-year-old daughter to some coworkers. When he came home that night and fell asleep, she sewed him into their bed with the top sheet so he couldn't get out and beat him to death with a frying pan. With the help of one of her friends who was a sheriff in Georgia, she crossed the state line and moved to Jacksonville to avoid being prosecuted. A few years later, she moved to Pensacola, and that's how my family ended up here. We've been here since. Story 26. That my mom cheated on my dad for the better part of 20 years. I knew because as a young child I witnessed it a couple of times, because the man would be at our house pretty often, and he and my mom would certainly not hide it. This man would be at my house every day while my father was at work, and sometimes when my father was there. My dad is a naive guy, so I think that to him it was just a friend of his and my mother coming over for coffee. Anyway, I would ask my mother throughout my teenage years if what I saw was reality or not, and she would always swear that it wasn't the case and basically gaslit me into thinking I didn't see what I saw. I confronted my mother when I was 24 years old and told her that I want the truth once and for all, and I would not back down, and she broke down and admitted it, and the first words out of her mouth while crying were, "Don't tell your father." I was in true shock for the first time in my life, even though deep down I already knew. Now, a few years have passed and I still have not told my father, because I am torn between being a good son and telling him the truth, or completely crushing him for however many years that he has left. I bear the weight of this burden every day, and I am so full of guilt because of it. Story 27. I have a couple of shocking things. Can't decide which is more weird. My great-grandpa ended a man over fried chicken. Someone handed plates out at a casual backyard get-together, and my grandpa apparently didn't like that the man stepped in front of him. This was in my late 30s. My dad and mom were not married at the time of my conception. They eventually split not long after I was born. My mom had 2 names picked out and decided the day I was born who I would be. Accidentally, I found out about 40 years later that I had half-sisters, all born after me. One of them has my exact same name, first and middle. The other has the alternative my mom and dad discussed. I have no relationship with him at all. Story 28. A mother in her 50s found out she had a secret sister. Her single mom barely showed, so her 3 kids never realized she was pregnant in the 1950s. Her mom disappeared for a week, leaving them with babysitters, then gave her unknown sister up for adoption. My wife was doing a lot of ancestry research and came across my mom's sister who had been given up for adoption. My grandma was furious when we asked to add her DNA to the family tree research, probably because of the hidden 4th child. Everyone got together and it's been lovely getting along. My mom and her newfound sister have the same mannerisms and looks, which really caught me off guard at first. It was a beautiful surprise, and now we have a new extended family. Story 29. My mother had a lot of mental issues that she self-medicated for most of her life. She liked to tell fanciful stories about her life, and for the most part, we all knew she was lying through her teeth. She once told my sisters and I that we had a long-lost older sister that she gave up for adoption, but compared to the other stories she told, like having lived on a riverboat, or that she once met the king of Romania, we chalked it up as another fantasy. Years after she passed away, though, a woman contacted my older sister and said she may be related to us. While we made arrangements to meet, I was still skeptical of the whole situation. That is, until we went to the airport to pick her up. As we stood at the arrivals gate, a near doppelganger of my mother walked out that door, looking like she did when I was a kid. It was uncanny to say the least. Story 30. My grandmother, one of the sweetest, gentlest people I've ever met, once casually told me that my grandpa used to get into silly moods and start waving his gun around and threatening to use it on her. Then afterwards he'd act ever so sorry, only to do it again later. So eventually, after he'd just done it again and was still in apology mode, she convinced him to get rid of the gun. She didn't seem to realize how messed up this was, and still viewed my grandpa as the love of her life. So I waited until I was alone to freak out privately and consider how to handle this information. I decided to match her vibe on this, and that trying to get her to see that this was domestic violence and extremely messed up wasn't worth it. In the short term, it just upset her, and in the long term, she had to be on a lot of painkillers all the time, so she was usually kinda out of it. I knew she probably only had a few years left. She had a hard time leaving the house, so therapy would be a challenge, even if she wanted to go. And it just seemed like whatever closure she might have gotten by confronting this incredibly traumatic thing wasn't worth how emotionally difficult it would be to get to the place of closure, if she ever did. And he died over a decade prior, so it wasn't like he was still a danger to her. Because I didn't want to show how horrified I wasn't able to ask her if he was abusive in other ways, though I suspect he must have been, because regularly pulling a gun out and threatening to shoot your wife is pretty extreme. Like, I doubt once the gun was no longer in play, he suddenly started handling his silly moods in a really healthy and reasonable way. Story 31. Mom was deliberately preventing me from seeing my dad on his designated visitation days. He'd arranged for a visit. She wouldn't tell me about it and instead would come up with all-day errands for us. This was before cell phones, so Dad would arrive at our house, have no idea where we were or when we'd get back, wait around a few hours, and then drive home again. I missed out on a lot of time I could have spent with my dad because of her, especially during my early teenage years, and my relationship with both of them is strained and awkward, at least partly because of it. Not a big shock compared to others here, I know, but it definitely shocked me. Story 32. Not me, but my good friend. It was mostly because she didn't put two and two together for a long time. Anyway, her mother is a very religious, very conservative person who goes to church multiple times a week, in prayer and Bible study groups, and worked at a Catholic organization for decades. Anyway, my friend is one of 4 children, the youngest one. Her oldest brother was born just over 7 months after her parents' wedding day. Her mother always said he was a honeymoon baby and a preemie. Well, when my friend was about 16, she was looking for her own birth certificate to finalize paperwork for an after-school job, and she came across her eldest brother's birth certificate. He was almost a 9LB baby. A preemie? Not so much. Mom and Dad got married because Mom was pregnant. My friend was shocked, to say the least. My friend confronted Mom and Mom came clean, but was surprised friend hadn't figured it out sooner. Story 33. When I was a baby, my parents had a huge fight. During the fight, my dad threatened to take me and leave my mom. We lived in Texas at the time, and she would never see me again. My mom took me to my grandparents. I don't know how long I stayed with them, but looking back at childhood pictures, there are pictures of me and my parents as a baby, then nothing, until like 5 years old. My parents continued fighting for pretty much their entire relationship to this day. The intensity of the fights have gone down, but I still remember the fights after I was in their life again. I'm trying to reconcile all this. Story 34. Not me, but a friend of mine. You know how in some families, a daughter will get pregnant really young and the parents will adopt the baby and raise it as her sibling? Well, this is what happened to him, except in reverse. When he was born, his parents were a lot older than most parents normally are. They were in their mid-50s and empty nesters when they had him. They just weren't up to the task of being parents all over again, but they didn't have the heart to give him up for adoption. So they just gave him to one of his sisters and she raised him as her son. So he grew up thinking that his parents were actually his grandparents and his siblings were his uncles and aunts. After both of his parents passed away, the family sat him down and told him everything. That really messed him up for a while. Story 35. No one in my family had a happy marriage except for my great-grandparents. Seriously, everyone else was either in an abusive and unhappy marriage or already divorced. I always looked up to my great-grandparents though. They were wonderful, although a bit eccentric people. My great-grandmother had a lot of quirks. One of them was that she loved TV so much that she slept on the couch each and every night for 20 years, so she could always have her programs on. Yeah, I was an adult when I finally learned that she refused to share a bed with my great-grandfather after he accidentally knocked up his secretary and had to pay to get her an abortion. So, yeah, that was quite the shock to me. Although, looking back, the signs were certainly there. I just was too young to know what they meant.